it's better than that.
Joining me is the panel, Liberal Senator James Paterson, Labor Senator Kimberley Kitching. James, the economy is in a bit of strife if the Reserve Bank's doing this sort of stuff.
A word of advice to all of your viewers, Andrew. Do not take financial advice from Anthony Albanese. He is not qualified. Money is not free, and the Reserve Bank reducing interest rates does not make money free. Please do not walk into your local bank tomorrow and ask for free money. It will not work out well for you.
But Kimberley, the thing is, with interest rates so low, almost about inflation, there's almost no cost of borrowing, which is in fact what governments around the country are saying. This is the time to borrow.
Well, of course, at 1%, that is lower than the inflation rate. So it's actually, you would be losing money by keeping money in a bank account. But I think this goes to the point the RBA has used. Well, I think yes, but the point still stands. I think, though, that the RBA is saying to us, look, we are moving, the stimulus we are able to create in the economy, we are doing that. But I think now there's a view that really the government has to pull some of its economic levers. One of the things it could do, if we have suggested a way forward of bringing forward tranche 2 of the tax cuts, which would give more money into Australians' pockets. But the other thing that could happen is that infrastructure spending could be brought forward as well, and that would be a way to stimulate the economy. I think, though, that there is a political problem here for the government, that if they do that, they would have to, forego the surplus, we're back to black, or the mixed grammatical sentence that the Prime Minister used during the campaign, we've got a surplus next year kind of thing. But I think that really we do need to stimulate the economy, and I think Anthony is correct, it is a cry for help. The Reserve Bank of Australia is a very serious institution. The Reserve Bank of Australia is saying to the government, please, you will need to stimulate the economy and use some of the economic levers that the government has at its disposal.
Yeah, it has said that. James, can I pick up on something that Kimberley just said? It is true that if you were to bring forward some spending, you wouldn't get the budget back in the black for the first time, I think, in 12 years, as you've promised. Is pride stopping you from doing what the economy really needs?
Andrew, we won't be taking advice from Anthony Albanese or the Labor Party on economic management, and it's highly revealing that Kimberley has just described the return to surplus as a political objective rather than an economic and budgetary one. But this is exactly the kind of attitude from the Labor Party that got us into the mess that we're in. It's why it's taken us much longer than we would have liked to repair the damage that they did to the budget when they were last in office, and we will absolutely not be throwing away the surplus just to give the Labor Party a political win. We're able to deliver tax relief immediately for low and medium income earners, yes, which will also stimulate the economy, as well as maintain a return to surplus and provide long-term income tax reform for all taxpayers. That's the best of all worlds, Andrew, and we won't be diverting from that path.
Andrew, I think,
just stick with James for a second, though, Kimberley.
Yeah.
James, last night I mentioned on the show how activists of the left who preach compassion, not all of them, but a number, I mentioned Marsha Langton, seem to give themselves a licence to act horribly to some people they claimed were bad. Now, I want to give a fresh example involving you, James. Father Rod Bauer, who's an Anglican priest of the far left, he's a bloke that, as you can see from his sign, keeps demanding more compassion. Last night saw you, James, on the ABC's Q&A and posted a vile, mean, false, defamatory tweet saying, who says the ABC is too far to the left? Qantas, that nice young man from the Hitler Youth on tonight. Your response to Father Bauer, Anglican priest, apostle of compassion and defamer?
Andrew, I'm not worried about myself personally. In politics, we all have thick skins and things like that are said by idiots on the internet all the time, Twitter especially. But I am worried on behalf of the Jewish community. Father Bauer has had to apologise previously to the Jewish community for insensitively invoking the Holocaust in a domestic political context. He's done that again. Our trivial political differences in Australian politics do not require the invocation of Hitler, the Holocaust, Nazis or anyone else from that era, and anyone who's a serious participant in public debate is able to make their political and policy points without resorting to that. So Father Bauer's tweets reflect on him and him alone.
Kimberly, there seems to be... Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I actually think personal attacks are totally unjustifiable. So when I saw that tweet, I was horrified by it for the reasons James mentions. I mean, real victims of the real Nazis would be offended. So, you know, Jewish people, the Roma, gays, in fact, you know, all of the people who were targeted by the Nazi regime. And I would think and I would hope that if Father Bauer is thinking of preaching, you know, love thy neighbour or anything from 1 Corinthians, he might have a good, long, hard look at himself. Because I just don't think those two things are compatible.
Hey, James, should Niki Savva be also searching for 1 Corinthians, love thy neighbour? I mean, she's got this book out. She obviously, I know she hates me. I haven't seen it, so I don't know how I don't think I'll come out. I don't think I'll be cutting and pasting for my CV from that book. And she's whacking anyone that brought down Malcolm Turnbull, her great hero. How do you go? How do you fare in this book?
Well, I confess, Andrew, I haven't read the whole thing yet either myself. It's about 400 pages long, and Kimberly and I have day jobs that we have to do, other than just reading political tomes like that. What I've read so far, there are things that I agree with, and there are things that I disagree with. There are things that I think she's got right, and things that I think she's got wrong. I mean, I don't have any personal quarrel with her. She's a journalist trying to do her job, and she's got a perspective which she's entitled to take. But I'm not going to provide a running commentary on every observation she's made, some of which I think are fair and some are unfair.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll agree with me that the bits about you and me, they must be wrong, right?
Oh, obviously.
Obviously wrong.
Hey, Kimberly, you are on a Senate Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade. I want to ask you, with that hat on, a scary warning today, I think, from security analyst Professor Hugh White. Now, I've disagreed with him in the past. He's from Australian National University, but he's not an idiot. He says in a new book that we now, for the first time in our modern history, don't have an ally in the Pacific that we can rely on. Not Britain, as we did before, obviously, and not now America. And he says this means China's the dominant player in the region, and Australia might need to consider getting its own nuclear weapons and spend an extra $30 billion on defence. Kimberly, what do you reckon?
Well, I think some of what Hugh is saying is disputed. In fact, today on the front of The Australian, Ben Packham wrote a very interesting article and an interview with Ambassador Culverhouse, the new US ambassador, on his 100 days of being in that position. And Ambassador Culverhouse said absolutely they would come to Australia's aid if there was any issue. And he reaffirmed the US, the alliance we have with the US. And, you know, it's the solemnity of that alliance. So I think that some of these claims, you know, are disputed, in fact, by the US and by its ambassador here. I think on the defence spend, you know, there is a bipartisan commitment to get defence spending back to 2% of GDP. I do think that's important. And in fact, the Prime Minister, in the address, the opening address read by the Governor-General this afternoon, that was flagged that it would go back up to the 2% mark. I think, though, that you know, obviously our region is contested, and we do want to, you know, there is a purpose. We do have an alliance with the US. That's not just about defence. It's also about, you know, they are in fact our, as Ambassador Culverhouse says today, our most important economic partner. And I think we, you know, we should remember these other factors. I think
look, you make good points there, Kimberly. No, you make good points there, but James, here's the thing. I do think that Australia has taken it for granted, and maybe Kimberly's right, that the US is not leaving the region anytime soon. But we have taken it for granted that there will always be a big brother to do some of our heavy lifting in the region. And we've coasted on that. You know, it shocked me, even when you had that confrontation with Indonesia over East Timor when it was becoming independent, and we had to send some troops there. Now, that's such a small campaign, really, in the big picture of things. Really small campaign. We still needed American assets to get our troops over there and keep the communications going. That really scared me.
Andrew, the Australian and US governments could not be closer at a political level, particularly at the very top, as we saw at the G20 last week, between Scott Morrison and Donald Trump. But the best insurance that Australia has about our defence relationship with the United States is our shared values and our shared bond. It's the American people who would demand of their government that they come to our aid if we're ever in a time of need. Of course, we can't be complacent about our own interests, particularly in our own region. And I think the way in which our government has refocused, for example, our aid priorities from the wider world to the Pacific region has been a really responsible thing to do. When Kevin Rudd was pursuing votes for UN Security Council seats, he was doling out money across Africa and Asia in areas where Australia didn't really have compelling national interests and neglected our own backyard. And we've refocused that as a government in the Pacific. I think that's been a very sensible thing to do.
But Kimberley, you know, I know it's really easy to run a China scare campaign, but I think it's also very easy for some people to ignore the fundamental character of this dictatorship. It's led now by a guy who's president for life, made himself that. It jails a lot of people. It's running virtual concentration camps in the Muslim region of China. And now we see, of course, people who know China very well, Hong Kong residents, they're writing pro-democracy riots there. What does that tell you about China?
Well, I think, so for a start, I think China didn't come in to Hong Kong. Obviously, it was the Hong Kong police who dealt with the violent protests that we saw overnight. I do think that, you know, the Fugitive Offenders Ordinance has really crystallised fears in Hong Kong. I think fears for people's
I'm sorry
freedom,
to interrupt you there, Kimberley. I should have wound myself up before I wound you up. I ran out of time. I'm terribly sorry. Kimberley, we'll come back to this one and give you a good say. Thank you so much, Kimberley Kitching, James Paterson. Hang on, because coming up next is